Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. And today, what we're going to be doing is ranking the last 10 Super Bowls in order. So we're going to go from 10 to 1, building up to, I think, what most people would agree is probably arguably the best Super Bowl, maybe all time. But we've been able to witness this over the past decade. But before we get into that, over the weekend, there was a pretty insane trade in the NBA. So it had nothing to do with the NFL, but it spurred on a lot of traction of what would a trade like what we saw with Luka Doncic to the LA Lakers, what would a similar trade framework look like from an NFL perspective? So I'm curious before we get into kind of the Super Bowl rankings, what are your thoughts on a comparable trade?
Well, it's a perfect topic, right? We have a nice hot winter day here in Charlotte. We're pushing over 80 degrees, and it was a hot, spicy trade at about, what do you say, 12:30 Saturday night, Sunday morning. I was actually going to bed, and I put my phone on the charger back here, and it usually lights up when you put it on there, but then it lit up again like a minute later, and I got a notification. I'm like, what is this? And I'm like, did Shams Charania get hacked? Luka Doncic to the Lakers for Anthony Davis and one first-round pick. Do they not know how important Luka is? But then he tweeted out, no, this is real. Then there was the fallout. I couldn't go to bed until like 4 o'clock because I was up trying to process something like this. Like, we've never seen anything like this before. And I know you tweeted out what could have been a comparison for a trade like that in the league. I think it's going to be more like if after the Bills lost the 13 seconds game where Josh Allen played super well, Gabe Davis had the game of his life, and they lose to the Chiefs, and then the Chiefs go on to the Super Bowl. I think that was when they lost to Tampa Bay. But it would be like Josh Allen getting traded for like a Matthew Stafford right then when Stafford was still on the Lions. Or today it could be like Lamar Jackson getting traded for Dak Prescott or something like that. A guy like Anthony Davis, I think, is probably in the 8 to 10 range right now of best players in the league. He's having a phenomenal season, don't get me wrong. But Luka Doncic is like such a transformative player. He elevates the team. He just took them to the finals last year. They beat the Thunder in 7 games. They beat the Minnesota Timberwolves. Who's the Clippers is who they beat the first time. Like, they're beating good teams. Obviously, they lose to the super team Celtics, but this is a guy that if he's 270 pounds or not, like the Dallas GM claims he is, he took them to the finals. And to get back a guy that isn't in the same stratosphere as Luka, the only people I think who are Nikola Jokic, Giannis, Embiid when he's healthy, and maybe now Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. It's that group of 5, and then a huge gap, and then everybody else. To get back a player that's not comparable to him, a young player in Max Christie who hasn't really done anything with the Lakers, and one singular first-round pick when the Lakers had 2 to give. They had much better players to also give. It's unfathomable. So an NFL comparison has to be like, who is a true elevator at the NFL level? I'm thinking like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, maybe even Joe Burrow. He took a team to a Super Bowl. They lost. What if it would have been Joe Burrow for, let's say, the J.J. Watt at the back end of his career? That's a comparable trade. Would you do that if you're the Bengals? No, especially after he just took you to a Super Bowl. So, like, there's no real comparison, but it's really stark to think about how a team is willing to trade away their future like that. And to your point, like the trade you came up with, like trading away Jamar Chase right after getting a triple crown, who in their right mind would do that? And I guess we have the answer now with the Mavs GM, who, by the way, they made not as bad a trade today, but still a pretty bad trade earlier today as well.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think the Jamar Chase for TJ Watt trade that I proposed was the most like apple to apple comparison. There's definitely some things that are off about it. But going to that point is that Chase is a difference maker on offense. Like, had the Bengals had an average defense, this team's probably like going on a playoff run. They had the ability to just go.
Joe Burrow's the MVP if they have an average defense.
Absolutely. And so I think like if the Bengals front office, for whatever reason, it's like, we don't want to max out Jamar Chase, pay him $35 million. I mean, that's what Luka was up for, the max extension. You don't want to pay him that. and your defense was so bad, and you're going to try to fix that. It's like if the Steelers compared George Pickens and Jamar Chase together, it wouldn't matter if it's Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. Heck, you could bring Kenny Pickett back. Nobody's stopping that duo. And so that's, I think, kind of the thought process that I had over the weekend. But like you said, it really comes down to who's the difference maker. And at the NFL level, that's going to be the quarterback position. So realistically, if we're going to talk about a trade that makes sense, that's comparable to Luka to LA for Anthony Davis and really nothing else, it would be like trading Joe Burrow for TJ Watt, or an edge rusher that is getting older, that has an injury history, and a quarterback that obviously can elevate, but does also have some injury concerns. I don't think that should be brushed off lightly with Luka. Clearly, the general manager doesn't think that the Dallas Mavericks can fix him. And if you think he's on a Zion Williamson, Joel Embiid trajectory where you're injured for half the year every single year, then it's like your availability does become your best ability, regardless if you can turn it on in the playoffs. So I'm not saying what he did was right. It was completely messed up. He is probably going to get fired because of it. But it will be very interesting to see if LeBron James can kind of like get into Luka's head and be like, hey, you need to stay in shape to protect your body so that you can be this amazing player that we all know you are. Because that's the numbers he's put up throughout the first, 5-6 years in his career, where it's like he's compared to Michael Jordan, LeBron James. That's it. That's the end of the list. And when you're getting compared to those guys and you can get your career back on track, I think that's kind of where LeBron James comes in with the Lakers in terms of getting him to sustained success over the next 5-10 years.
For sure. And to your point, this is year 7 for Luka. Year 1, unanimous rookie of the year. The next 5 years, he was top 8 in MVP voting and first team All-NBA. Unreal stuff. He's number 2 all-time in playoff points per game scored. Number 3 all-time in regular season points per game scored. So right up there with MJ and LeBron in both respects. And it's just unfathomable to me. Even with his conditioning problems, they were really good at the start of the year before he hurt his leg. And he had a bad leg in the playoffs last year, still drug him to the finals. So I don't really see it there. But to your point, it would be like, I think this is an apt comparison and shift into some of the news we've gotten over the past couple of days, like trading Lamar Jackson, who had a bit of an injury history early in his career, for an older defensive player like Myles Garrett. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. Obviously, the Ravens would never trade Lamar Jackson away, probably for anyone. But Myles Garrett requested a trade on Monday, and it's kind of got everyone up in arms. I think he wants to go to a contender, and that's like you're thinking, oh, is it going to be the Eagles, the Bills, the Washington Commanders, who I think would be a really fun fit? And it's got everybody up in arms. Obviously, the Panthers should throw their names in. Every team should. I don't think he's going to be a Panther, although Matt Harmon of Reception and Perception, and he was a guest on Football 301, which was that is Charles McDonald and Nate Tice. It's the Yahoo football kind of podcast. He mentioned that the Panthers would be a strong team to trade for Garrett, because if they can retool the defense and just get maybe one other person on offense that could take a large step, I don't think we're going to, as much as I would love to trade for Garrett. What are some of the what are your thoughts on a Garrett trade request, and where would you like to see him end up next season if they do trade him? Because the implications of the trade are it's going to be tough for Cleveland to trade him.
What's interesting, and I want to kind of bring this back to what we've seen over that past half decade with other defensive linemen, Aaron Donald, Chris Jones. They haven't threatened a trade because they've been on a competitive team, a team that's been in the playoffs. What they've threatened is retirement or not playing without a new deal. And so I think in order for the Browns to rectify this situation, Jason Fitzgerald with Over the Cap, he's really good at kind of understanding and seeing through some of this. It doesn't make a lot of sense for the Browns to trade him. They would have to restructure to the max 2 other contracts, one of those being obviously Watson's deal. And you have to cut a player or two to even just get underneath the cap this year. And so what makes more sense is, I think, extending Garrett and giving him a number or a guaranteed number that makes him happy, that he's okay staying on this Browns team over the next couple of years while they're rebuilding. Because if they draft, say, a guy like Cam Ward with all the talent they have on defense, and they're able to kind of rebuild everything, I think they have the pieces to get back into kind of the competitiveness of the AFC and not be a bottom dweller that they were this year. I mean, this was a team that was in the wild card last year that was carried by its defense. And so I think you still have a lot of that there. It's just going to depend on who's going to be the quarterback moving forward. So I think if Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski can sit down with him, rework his deal, give him some more money so that he's happy. Because I'll tell you this much, getting a $5-10 million raise on top of what you're getting, that's going to sweeten the deal for a lot of people. We just saw this with Liam Cohen. The Buccaneers are probably a better situation for him. He has probably a better chance of putting a product that's going to be more competitive on the field just because of continuity and working with the same guys than he does in Jacksonville. But he got like $10 million more dollars. So it's that kind of like life-changing money that sometimes, even though you want to go win a Super Bowl, when you see that offer on the table, you aren't going to say no to it. That's once in a lifetime. Like, yes, would you like to go win a ring? You can play out the extent of your deal and do what Jadeveon Clowney's done and go sign 1-year deals in your 30s and just kind of jump from team to team if that's really something you want to do. So that's my thoughts on the trade. I really don't think he's going to get moved. And a lot of people are trying to put together these like creative deals. It just doesn't make sense for Cleveland. Like, why are you sending a cornerstone blue chip player that's been a key part of what you've done over the past half decade plus, and you strap yourself even more to the Watson deal?
Yeah, number 1 overall pick, kind of the face of the current Browns iteration, I think. And to your point, as far as like a trade compensation thing would work, it almost makes sense for them to do it after the draft where they can do a post-June 1 designation, save some more money there. But then you have teams like, let's throw the Panthers back in, who have the 8th overall pick this year. If Bryce Young continues to improve and the defense isn't the worst of all time, I don't think they'll have the 8th pick next year. And a lot of the teams that we think of in that top 10 who would have like sweet pieces to give them might improve. So obviously if you go into the future, there's uncertainty with what you're getting and a whole thing, a lot of hoopla there. But I think from like you're talking about, from Cleveland's side, they should want to get it done, keep him there, because like you said, he could do kind of like how we traded for Jared Allen toward the end of his career and chase the Super Bowl. That could be an option for him, but I would stay if they can get it done. I'd like to team him back up with Clowney because Clowney played there a couple of years, but don't see that happening. On the organizational front, however, like we were talking about, I wouldn't want to trade Myles Garrett, but another organization that apparently does want to trade one of its stars, one of its big faces in the franchise. We learned last night, Monday night, that Cooper Kupp said that the Rams are looking to trade him immediately. He put out like a statement like, thank you, LA, for everything. I love you guys. You guys been second home, like typical like trade statement kind of things. And I'm just wondering, I know it's obviously financial for them because I don't think they could give up Cooper Kupp because he's played well when he's healthy. Where would you see Cooper Kupp going? Because this is another guy who's making a lot of money. He got that Super Bowl raise like Aaron Donald did, like Stafford did after that win. Where do you think he would fit? I think this one's a bit more murky because 31 other teams can call Cleveland about Myles Garrett. I don't know who all is going to call about Cooper Kupp.
Well, I mean, there was a suitor for Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, the guys that got extended the same year as he was. And that's typical for these kind of wide receivers that get on these third contracts. They don't play out the rest of their deal, and teams see their production drop and their pay increase. And it's like, we can't kind of make this make sense on the books. Like, it's a business at the end of the day. And that's when these teams sign these players to these deals, the corners they kind of back themselves into. And so do I think that you have 31 other teams that are at least calling and asking for a price? No, but I do think there is going to be a team that sends a day 3 pick that wants a veteran wide receiver in the building to kind of help either like develop younger wide receivers or just be a reliable pass catcher for the quarterback. I mean, we've seen what Adam Thielen's been for the Carolina Panthers over the past couple of years. He can definitely be that reliable target for a number of quarterbacks across the league. So, like I said, Devontae Adams got moved from Las Vegas to New York. We saw Stephon Diggs go from Buffalo to Houston. Both of them had impactful games this past year. Were they as good as they were in their prime? No, but there's still some left in the tank, and I expect to see that with Cup in the offseason.
Yeah, I think a contender makes sense. If Adam Thielen's contract expired this offseason, I thought that would be a good spot for Cup, like a mentoring role, because we do still have a young wide receiver room. But I can't imagine both he and Cup on the, he and Thielen on the same team, and Jalen Coker, who I think thrives from the slot, and Xavier Legette, who I'm not sure is going to be an X wide receiver. I think he would work better from the interior as well. We need an outside guy. So I'm not super sure that trading for Cup is the right move there. And I think that's all the trade talk. There's obviously going to be more and more trade talk as the season or as the offseason progresses, but getting more into the coaching aspect over the past couple days, Chip Kelly is hired from Ohio State back into the NFL. He is going to be the offensive coordinator and play caller for Las Vegas, and he got a bag. Talk about Myles Garrett settling for an extra $5 or $6 million. Well, that's what Chip Kelly is getting per year, $6 million. And the report when Tampa Bay was trying to keep Liam Cohen and make him the highest paid offensive coordinator was just over $4 million. So Chip Kelly is getting 150% of what would have been the highest paid play caller. I think he's a very, I would say, I think he's a generational play caller. I think him creating the RPO, bringing it to the NFL, and what he's done at the college level is very, very impressive. I don't think he's a great head coach, so to speak, but he doesn't have to be here. I think if they can get somebody, maybe a Justin Fields, who is mobile enough to operate those kind of things, get a young receiver to pair with Bowers and Michael Mayer, I think they could be a really fun offense this season, especially considering they have a bit of an underrated O-line. I know you're a big Colton Miller fan.
Well, it's that. I think they have Jackson Powers Johnson. You mentioned the two tight ends. They have some intriguing pieces. We talked about this the other week. And so when you bring in a creative mind, you have continuity on the defensive side of the ball with Patrick Graham. You have playmakers on that side. You have Pete Carroll, who's a known culture builder. Like, it's starting to feel like they're putting something together in Las Vegas. And to your point about Chip Kelly, obviously not being as successful as a head coach, very intrigued if he learned a lot from Ryan Day at Ohio State. He learns a lot from Pete Carroll, even as he is a little bit older, and becomes the heir apparent in a couple of years when Pete Carroll's contract expires. I mean, Pete Carroll's in his 70s. I think Chip Kelly's in his 60s. So if you're looking to pass the torch, if they end up building something here in Las Vegas, I would be very intrigued to kind of keep a tab on that. But I like the hire. I think what's interesting, the Las Vegas Raiders, they pick, do they pick in the top 10? I feel like they do.
They pick number 6 currently.
So they could add a guy, like where you're saying a wide receiver, they could add Ted. And like, I think that would be a good addition. Like Aiden O'Connell, he protected the ball well. He got the ball out quick. I don't think he's necessarily like a game changer or game wrecker, but you have that on the roster. Like you said, go after a Justin Fields, and all of a sudden it might be a little bit like entertaining. They might be that feisty team in the AFC West that goes punch for punch with the rest of the division. Because I think what's interesting is you brought up obviously Chip Kelly, but you have Pete Carroll in that division. You have Jim Harbaugh, like previous Pac-12 guys that are now in the NFC or AFC West. And it's just cool to see a bunch of guys that have a lot of familiarity with each other, again, going head to head. And that'll be fun to watch.
Well, formerly Pac-12, now what would be USC is in the Big Ten now, just where Harbaugh was with Michigan, just where Chip Kelly was with Ohio State. Obviously, they won the championship this year. I feel like I have to mention that when you talk about coach movement, stuff like that. Todd Monken, a former 2-time national championship winner, got extended with Baltimore. Don't think we know the numbers there, but I think when you don't land a head coaching job in back-to-back cycles, but your offensive output and performance continues to increase, you got to do the right thing and extend them, keep them happy, because you never know when an opportunity arises. Look at Liam Cohen. And then the other big hire, Nick Caley, I believe was the tight end coach with the Rams. I think that's where he was. Yeah. He's been on McVay's staff. He's the new OC in Houston, replacing Bobby Slowick, who was let go. Again, strike while the iron's hot if you're a head coaching candidate. But he is now tasked with kind of revitalizing the Texans offense, getting C.J. Stroud back to where he was his rookie year, where he looked like one of those transcendent guys like we talked about with Mahomes, Jackson, Burrow, Allen. Obviously took a bit of a step back, but I think Houston's in a good spot with how poor that division is currently.
Yeah, and I don't think their offensive line was all that great this year. Obviously, wasn't good in his rookie year, but I think it really took a step back, even though it got healthier in year 2 of CJ Stroud. So I think bringing in this guy that's been with Sean McVay, who's rebuilt the offensive line multiple times in Los Angeles. We just saw what Liam Cohen did with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They went out and drafted Graham Barton. They moved Tristan Wirfs to left tackle. They made some things work. And so I think I can see that kind of happening again in Houston, and CJ Stroud kind of picking up where he left off in his rookie year. Nico Collins hopefully has a full offseason. Tank Dell, maybe he gets back healthy. I don't know. At this point, I think Tank Dell is like heading into that column where you're injury prone because
I think
smaller.
Because it was toward the end of the year and such a destructive injury, we might see him miss the entire year. Similar to Jonathan Brooks, who retore his ACL in November. He's probably going to miss this entire year unless by some miracle we make the Super Bowl or something. I think we'll probably see the same thing with Tank Dell. And suddenly they're talking about offensive hires. They're a sneaky offensive team. If it's just going to be Nico Collins, they might need some O-line reinforcements, receiver reinforcements, stuff of that nature. As the draft approaches, we'll kind of keep those tabs in the back of our mind moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think it's really the offensive side because they have like a top 5, top 10 defensive unit. They have a lot of those guys locked up. D'Amico Ryans, that's obviously his specialty. It is really just figuring out how to get this offense back on track. So you're competing against teams like the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, because right now those are the 3 best teams and they have the 3 best quarterbacks. And like we talked about, the offensive lines for all 3 of those teams are really good. So if you want to kind of get in contention, you got to fix the O-line. I think that's more of a priority than wide receiver 2 next to Nico Collins. Moving into kind of the main thing of this episode. We're already 20 minutes in. We're going to kind of go over the top 10 Super Bowls. We came to some sort of agreement on Super Bowls 6 through 10. It wasn't completely unanimous, but 1 through 5 is where there will be more disparity, and I think there should be because there are things that we took away from some of those games that we thought were more impactful, whether it was from a legacy standpoint or just how the game played out. But at 10, I think it's very easy to say this. It's probably one of the most boring Super Bowls of all time, most boring Super Bowl ever in my lifetime. And it was the 13-3 snooze fest down in, I believe it was Atlanta, between the Los Angeles Rams and the New England Patriots. And the big takeaway and highlight from this was that the Rams were on a tear all year. Nobody really stopped them all year outside of really 2 teams. And it was the first matchup against the Detroit Lions in Detroit against Matt Patricia. And he seemed to run this kind of cover 4 look, bear front. I was able to take away some of the zone runs and kind of stifle the play action. Obviously, the Rams at that time were a much better team than the Lions, so they were able to win that game. But Vic Fangio did something very similar in Chicago against the team, completely shut the offense down. And we saw Bill Belichick execute that same exact game plan to perfection, made Goff look abysmal, and ultimately led to him getting traded away for Matthew Stafford. So this was a very pivotal point for the Rams leading up to their Super Bowl win. What are your thoughts on this outside of kind of what's already been said about the snooze fest?
Yeah, over the last decade, definitely the worst Super Bowl. It was a pivotal point, I think, for the entire landscape of the league, right? Not just for the Rams trading and getting Stafford, but look at how the Lions have improved since then. I'm not saying Goff's the reason for that, but they've certainly taken a step. But like you're talking about, the Super Bowl was absolutely horrible, ended 13-3. I remember the place I was at, I was actually standing up the whole time because it was my leg day. And it was just torture to stand up and watch that game. Like hardly any scoring. I'm a fan of defense, but I'm not a fan of when like the Rams were able to get like within the 40, but then just couldn't do anything. It looked like with Jimmy G, like the one missed pass, and we'll talk about that later. But Goff was just missing Brandon Cooks, missing Robert Woods. Cooper Kupp didn't really contribute. Like this was just a terrible Super Bowl, and really stands alone at the bottom, I think, of the past 10 Super Bowls we've witnessed. There's just not much more to say. It was a true and pure stinker.
Yeah. I mean, from like a standpoint that I think this was one of the first times that a team has been held out of the end zone in the Super Bowl. I may be wrong, but it's like one of the only occurrences. And like the fact that you have this historic offense during the regular season just get completely stopped in its tracks is very interesting because then the Patriots rolled into 2019 and they had the best defense that year. Obviously had some issues on the offensive side and saw a wild card exit, but it was very interesting from this point going forward with Stephon Gilmore, the defensive player of the year the following year. Just a very, very talented unit. And I think was very encapsulatory of the kind of Patriot dynasty that a lot of their Super Bowl wins came when they had a top 5, top 10 defense. So I think this was like a fitting end for the Patriot dynasty. Just like you said, completely boring game. Not a lot to kind of like glean from in terms of those big highlight plays. I think the biggest highlight play was like Rob Gronkowski catching a seam ball that set up like a short touchdown run. Like it wasn't anything exciting all game. It was almost like the one meme where it's the guy poking the stick or the inanimate object on the ground. It's like, can you do something?
Do something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just do something. So another, I wouldn't say like complete snooze fest because there was scoring, there were turnovers, there was movement.
There were
the ball.
turnovers. There were some turnovers.
Yes, there were. And so I think at number 9, and as Panthers fans, we're reluctant to talk about this game, but the 24-10 game against the Broncos had elements where it was just boring. I think the Panthers had chances at times. If Aqib Talib wasn't a complete thug, hurting Philly Brown, ripping his head off on a couple occasions. If veterans like Jericho Cotchery catches the ball initially and doesn't let it bobble, if Mike Tolbert doesn't fumble, obviously if Cam doesn't take some of those sack strip fumbles, and you can put the blame wherever you want. Obviously, the 15-1 Panthers didn't come to play. The Broncos, with the taste in their mouth from that 2013 Super Bowl loss, that obviously doesn't make this list, but they looked themselves in the mirror and they got really physical on defense, and they won the game in the trenches, and they were able to be physical with the wide receivers on the outside, and it was a punch in the mouth. I hated seeing Cam after the game, and you could hear the defender in the room next to him at the time. Like that is still etched into my memory of just hearing like, yeah, we knew we had to punch Cam in his mouth, and we did exactly that. And Cam's just trying to process everything, and he gets up and leaves. And obviously the media is on his back because he's an African male, showing emotions after a game, which if Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, they did any of that, everybody would love it. And write whole articles about how this guy is passionate about what he loves.
I could do an entire, probably 24-hour episode about how the media paints Cam, how the league did him dirty, so to speak. I'm not going to go there too much just because this Super Bowl was so painful, right? This was the Super Bowl that really put Von Miller in the Hall of Fame. He went up against a guy that is probably a little better than me at blocking the pass rusher, and Mike Rimmers was quite poor, just strip sack into the end zone. The one later where he didn't dive on it, like that one. The interception off of the guy's hands, just a ton of stuff just went wrong. And as far as fun Super Bowls go, even if I were a fan of the 30 other teams, I would say I wouldn't have enjoyed this. You obviously enjoyed it if you're Denver. But this one was pretty boring all around. Not a ton of offense. The one Panthers touchdown we do get was a Jonathan Stewart run, and just out of the game, like it seemed every time there would be a drive, something stalled out. And I feel like that was on both sides. Like Peyton Manning obviously hadn't played his best. He missed, I think, like 9 or 10 games in that season. Brock Osweiler finished that season and got them to the playoffs before Manning came back. Manning just looked like horrible throughout the entire playoffs, but that team dragged him there. The defense got the win, and the rest is history.
Yeah. I mean, Coney Ealy had the game of his life, which I'm happy for that 1 second round pick by the Panthers that I think we ended up trading to the Patriots and getting actually a decent return. Mm-hmm. I felt like it was like the Jonathan Mingo return on that one, where it was like, he's really worth that much. Like he's been a bum, but glad that we were able to kind of do that at the time. At number 8 is Mahomes. Actually, he's second Super Bowl he was ever in.
He's going to be on here a bunch, so he has to go somewhere, you know?
Well, this game, it was one of those things because we had seen Mahomes for so long be able to pull off the rally. the bring it back in the fourth quarter, win or lose, still make it like a one possession game. And this was one of those games where he actually kind of got his teeth kicked in, and the Chiefs had to do a lot of like reevaluating. But obviously, the COVID year, Tampa Bay hosts the Super Bowl. Tom Brady is playing for the Bucs. They have an all-star unit on both sides of the ball. I mean, the fact that he's throwing to Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, has Tristan Wirfs, Donovan Smith, and I think some decent veteran offensive interior linemen. And it's just insane. Like, this guy had everything you could need. The Chiefs weren't necessarily stacked on both sides. They did have playmakers, but when it came down to it, they were able to get after Mahomes, make his life miserable. And even though Mahomes had several circus-type throws, they weren't brought down. The team didn't execute, and they lost 31-9. So I think it's fitting that it's here. There were some big plays, big moments. Obviously, Tom Brady's 7th ring, his final ring. A lot of historical significance with that. So I think that's why it's here. It's out of the other games, this was probably the least competitive that are ahead of it. And I don't think there's really kind of room to disagree. Like, these bottom 3 Super Bowls, I think from a unanimous standpoint are pretty congruent.
Yeah, they're in a tier of their own. Just no competitive aspects past the first quarter in these games. 2 of them, I don't want to call the Denver-Carolina one a blowout, but it felt like it. This was a blowout. The Buccaneers beating the Chiefs. You talked about the offensive side of the ball. Their defensive line was just a menace. Shaq Barrett had like 15 sacks that year. They bring in Ndamukong Suh. I think that was Vita Vea's rookie year. Like, they had a really strong defense as well. And Kansas City was just outmatched. And it's cool to see how Kansas City has rebuilt since then and adapted, because I think they've addressed the most important part of their team. Like we talked about earlier, their offensive line is the strength of their team on offense, obviously outside of Patrick Mahomes. The guy I talked about in the Panthers Super Bowl, Mike Rimmers, he made a cameo in this one as well, because the Chiefs, I believe, both their tackles were hurt, actually. And Rimmers, I think, started on the left and got destroyed by Shaq Barrett all game. So that's 2 Super Bowls losses for Mike Rimmers. At least he made it there twice. But yeah, these 3 Super Bowls, I think we can all agree that over the past decade, they were certainly the worst to watch. And once we get into the next ones, I truly enjoyed watching all of the next group. I enjoy it because I'm a football fan. I enjoyed watching all of them except the Panthers one. But these were actual fun games that I'm like keeping my eyes glued to the screen, watching and seeing what happened. And I think we are in agreement with both number 7 and 6. Number 7 being the LA Rams and Stafford and Kupp beating the Cincinnati Bengals with that fourth quarter drive, the no-look pass to Kupp on 4th down. There was the holding penalty, defensive holding penalty on 4th down that set the Rams up on the goal line. Bit of controversy there, but this was a banger of a game to watch, especially after halftime, coming out of the half, and T. Higgins going, I think it was like 80 yards for the touchdown. He had the face mask on Jalen Ramsey, but at the time, because we didn't realize it in game speed, that was such a cool play to see.
It was a very cool play to see. I would say the holding call that comes a little bit later, and this is where kind of like penalties, I want to say offset, is if the face mask penalty is called, T. Higgins doesn't get that score. And it's like, okay, do the Bengals go down and score a touchdown on that drive? Right. And so it kind of creates these ripple effects where it's like, even though there are some missed calls, it kind of all balances out at the end. I think the coolest part about this is Odell Beckham obviously goes out. Matthew Stafford has the no-look pass to Cooper Kupp. They go ahead, they go up. But it was right there at the end. You have Jalen Ramsey on Jamar Chase on the right side. Joe Burrow can't buy enough time. Aaron Donald blows up the middle of the line. And that meme of, okay, do you have somebody to protect Joe Burrow so he can throw it downfield? Or do you not have an offensive line and have a guy running wide open downfield? And sure enough, that was exactly the case. I mean, Jamar Chase blew by Jalen Ramsey. If Joe Burrow had had another second or two and he launched it, that's probably game. The Bengals win a Super Bowl. Joe Burrow, I think, has a leg up in some of these conversations with Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, despite not having an MVP to his name. And it's simply because he beat Mahomes in Arrowhead and he won a Super Bowl. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. And I think for Stafford's legacy, I thought he was an underrated quarterback when he was in Detroit. I thought he had the short end of the butt being on a franchise that couldn't put talent around him. And when he got out to Los Angeles, he made the most of the opportunity and did what Jared Goff couldn't. So him being able to finish the deal, McVay kind of getting into that group of Super Bowl winning head coaches, just some really cool historical stuff, especially when some of the coaches that we're going to be talking about coming up, and Kyle Shanahan has never won a Super Bowl as both a offensive play caller and a head coach. So I think that's a good segue into Super Bowl 6. And we were back and forth. Is this the 2019 Chiefs 49ers game? Is this the 2022 one? And I think I was able to convince you that the reason why we put 2022 here, or 2023, my apologies. Yeah, the 2022 is the Eagles game. The 2023 49ers Super Bowl is because it never got to a point where it was like a 10-point lead. And in 2019, that Mahomes playoff run, he had all three playoff games. He was down by 10 or more points at some point in the game. He was down 24-0 against the Houston Texans in the divisional round. I think they fell to like 10-0 or like 17-7 at one point against the Titans in the AFC Championship game, rallied to win that game. And then obviously they fall 20-10 against the 49ers. But I'm talking about game 4. But the reason because of that disparity is we didn't see any team pull away last year. It was always like a 3 or 7 point margin. There were plays left on the field. Obviously, the defense came out and played their butts off for Steve Spagnuolo, and they were able to keep Brock Purdy from connecting with Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk or forcing a fumble on Christian McCaffrey to keep the Chiefs in this game. But there weren't a lot of big plays, and it wasn't until the end of the game where it was like legacy-defining drives that Mahomes kind of picked it up. So that's kind of why I have this game here. I think out of the other Super Bowls that have been played since then, even though it was the second ever Super Bowl to go to an overtime, I just felt like it lacked the luster that
like
some
the
of the
signature
other games
moment, maybe. It doesn't have that.
It didn't have that. Like it did, obviously, with like the corn dog play at the end that got the Super Bowl. The Peter King interview with Andy Reid is phenomenal, and like McCole Hardman going from the Jets and having that one magician predict that he would win a Super Bowl and he gets traded to the Chiefs. Like there are definitely cool storylines, but in terms of like those big plays, like when we talk about a David Tyree or Mario Manningham catch that was like defining who won that game. We didn't really have that.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Obviously, the last play, the game winner, is important. But yeah, this one lacked the shine. I'm kind of biased. I think I like this one a bit more because it went to overtime, because San Francisco got the ball first in overtime and actually scored a field goal, and then Mahomes has to come back and win it with a touchdown. But I think all the 5 we have left, I think all had more hype, more big play, certainly more scoring as I'm looking at all of these. Yeah, a lot more scoring in some cases. But yeah, this one, it was fun to watch for sure. But I think Mahomes has more signature wins. Obviously, Tom Brady's going to have some signature wins on here. And the remaining team, I think that win was more signature than this last Mahomes win as well. Obviously, he gets his 3rd ring in this past Super Bowl. But yeah, I like the other ones a lot better. I think we can go in order with your list here that you've put. Obviously, we're going to have a little bit of disagreement that you and I can talk about. But the one that you have at number 5, and I think I have at number 3, is going to be Kansas City beating Philly in the 2022 Super Bowl. Kind of like that Rams Bengals game. There was a controversial holding call toward the end. But other than that, this game was cinema. Like, talk about high scoring back and forth toward the end. Another deficit for Mahomes to overcome. Kadarius Toney, the guy they traded for, the former New York Giant, 20th overall pick, with the incredible punt return to set up the game-winning score. This was a really fun Super Bowl to watch.
It was fun. It was back and forth. It had a defensive touchdown because of a Jalen Hurts fumble. Again, Mahomes had a 10-point deficit in the 3rd quarter. They were down 24-14. Obviously, score a touchdown on the opening drive in the 3rd quarter that cut it to a 1-possession game, and it went back and forth from there. And I had that feeling that it was whoever had the ball last was going to win. And unfortunately, and the holding call, I don't want to dispute it. It was clear holding by the book. Like you can't. like dispute that. It's more just it had to end on that note. And for me, this is why I have it at 5. You obviously have it higher, but I felt like the other games ahead of it, there was more drama going down to the very last like few seconds. And that really took the gusto out for me. Was just it had to go out on that note. That Bradbury had the hold on that good play design, and they pretty much walked off on a win. So it's those kind of aspects where it's frustrating, because I would have liked to see it kind of go back and forth to where we saw the Chiefs and Bills a couple years back in the divisional round, where it got to a 13-second point. Like it would have been cool to see Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts have to be in that situation. Obviously, Hurts was kind of in that situation at the end. Had the Hail Mary. They didn't have enough time, though, because the clock had been bled, to even drive to score a field goal. So it's a give and take. Obviously, a banger of a Super Bowl. We get a rematch of that this year, both in our top 5. Hopefully, we get another game like that. At number 4 for me, I have the other Chiefs 49ers game. And like I said already a couple minutes ago, don't really need to go over this. Patrick Mahomes is down 10 points, and he's down 10 points with 7 minutes left in the game, and a 3rd and 15 hits Tyreek Hill. And what's funny is you're down 10 points with 7 minutes left to go. They won that game 30-20. Now, obviously, Jimmy G, he hits, who is their speedster? Emmanuel Sanders. He hits Emmanuel Sanders. If he doesn't throw it 2-3 yards ahead of him, hits him right in stride, they score a touchdown. I think that's where it goes back and forth a little bit at the end. And that's, for me, why it stays out of the top 3, is because we missed that final drama, but that comeback and to be able to rally like that was just the I guess, cherry on top for that 2019 run, because it didn't matter the deficit. The Chiefs were coming back and they were going to win no matter what. And that was insane to watch. That was peak Patrick Mahomes outside of, I would say, 2022. Like, it really was him in 2019.
Yeah, and this was the next step of like the Mahomes mythos, so to speak, right? 2018, first year as the starter, right? Throws 55 touchdowns, I want to say.
I think it was 50, but he went over 5,000 yards.
Yeah, that's what it was. 50 touchdowns, 5,000 yards. Keeps Drew Brees out of the MVP discussion. Thank you for that, Patrick Mahomes. And then they make it to the AFC Championship and lose in overtime to Tom Brady. And then the next year they come back, another great season, go to the Super Bowl. Like you're saying, down 10 with 7 minutes left. The final score is 31-10. You wouldn't think that they had 10 points through 53 minutes, but the Tyreek Hill play and then 2 Damian Wilson plays. That's going to be a TikTok forgotten running back guy in like 10 years. But he was really good for them that season. Obviously, he probably could have been Super Bowl MVP, but obviously Mahomes gets his first ring, Super Bowl MVP, and this was the next step for him, chasing the GOAT and Tom Brady. But with the next 3 Super Bowls, I think if you've listened this far, you can figure out they're all going to involve Tom Brady in some respect. You have at number 3 the Philly and New England game. I have that one at number 2. And this was a banger. You want to talk about offense, 41-33, the Philly special, Nick Foles of all people, after the Carson Wentz ACL tear. Tom Brady throws for over 500 yards. This was the offensive Super Bowl. And obviously it ends with a defensive play in Philly's respect, but this was a back and forth shootout. And this was probably the one that I enjoyed the most outside of the one that we'll talk about at number 1.
I think what's interesting is there wasn't necessarily a lot of star power on both sides as some of the other Super Bowls that we have already talked about or are going to talk about. But what was cool about it is you had the Philly special. You had the high scoring affair where it's going back and forth and back and forth. And if you look in this game, there are a couple of 4th downs that are gone for. And this was kind of the start of analytically driven kind of calls or mindsets of, hey, you need to go for it on 4th down. Like at this point, 7 points is worth more than 3. And that's how we got the Philly special. It was 4th down on the goal line. And they drew up one of the best plays that you could for that situation. But I think what's very interesting is this was obviously the first Super Bowl that Howie Roseman wins with the Philadelphia Eagles. Their top 2 wide receivers were Alshon Jeffrey and Nelson Aguilar. And I would say, if we're talking about like prototype of a wide receiver, they were both poor man versions of the wide receivers that they're rocking now in their past 2 Super Bowl visits. And A.J. Brown being that big physical wide receiver, and Devontae Smith compared to Nelson Aguilar. I think Devontae Smith doesn't have the drop problem that Aguilar does, and he's a better route runner. I think Aguilar might have a little bit more in the speed
A little more
department.
juice, yeah.
Yeah, but I would prefer the Devontae Smith package over a guy that can just blow past you and drops the ball. So what is interesting, Alshon Jeffrey, he had it was like a 30 or 40-yard touchdown catch. A.J. Brown, the last time he was in the Super Bowl, big touchdown catch, like in that 40 to 50-yard range. So if you're looking for a prop, I'm not saying this is necessarily it, but A.J. Brown, that big physical Eagles wide receiver, we've seen it the last 3 times they've been in the Super Bowl, have been able to dial up a shot against cover one looks. I would definitely look for that in this game. But this game had it all. Like you said, Brandon Graham strips the ball at the end. Tom Brady ends it that way. And it was great to see the Patriots lose because obviously Tom Brady had pretty much the GOAT discussion wrapped up the previous year against the Atlanta Falcons with that whole 28-3, which obviously we haven't talked about that Super Bowl, so you guys know it's coming up. But it was very interesting to watch a guy like him still lose despite a magnificent performance, like you said, over 500 yards, doing it with Brandon Cooks going out in the first half. So you're throwing the guys like Chris Hogan, Julian Edelman, obviously Rob Gronkowski is great, but it was not the offenses we've seen of the past previous Patriots years.
Yeah, that might have been a Malcolm Mitchell year too for the Patriots there. And it's interesting. Throughout this list, you're going to see a lot of things in common. Tom Brady and the Patriots, right? Tom Brady again on the Bucks. Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes. You saw McVay on here twice. Shanahan on here twice. Philly is on here twice. And if we made it 11 years, they'd be on there 3 times because they're playing in five or 6 days for another one. And there's no real connective tissue there outside of Howie Roseman. And you look at how he rebuilt the team from that 2017 Super Bowl that had Carson Wentz as its quarterback. Obviously, he doesn't play. To getting rid of him and getting Jalen Hurts, retooling the wide receiver room, the entire defense. And then even from 2022 to now, that defensive line change. We need to give a lot of credit to Howie Roseman, especially if they get this win on Sunday, about how he's able to rebuild a team despite not having an Andy Reid or a McVay or anything like that. Because at the time, Doug Peterson might have been thought of as like a big analytically driven, great play calling coach. But as we've seen recently, outside of the Philly infrastructure, he kind of falls apart. So a lot of credit to Howie Roseman there for how they've really been able to build the Eagles over the past almost a decade now.
Yeah, no, he has cracked the code. He knows how to manipulate contracts. Obviously, they're big. I would say that the big thing that separates him is that they're not only able to draft some of these superstars, they sign them early. They save money, and then that allows them to extend them again. And it's to the point where, like A.J. Brown, he is technically already signed to his 3rd extension. Pretty younger. They've jumped ahead of that curve to where when he's wrapping up that deal, his career is probably wrapping up. It's not going to be this, oh, we got to get him off the books. He's coming off the books. You don't have to worry about some of this stuff. I think the biggest thing to look for is if Jalen Hurts isn't the guy moving forward, how are they going to be able to get off that contract? Because I don't know if his play is necessarily warranted his job being secure. Obviously, you're in the Super Bowl, but I think that there are 10 to 12 guys right now in the NFL that if you put them in that Philadelphia Eagles offense, they put up MVP numbers. And we did not see MVP numbers from Jalen Hurts this year. It's like outside of the tush push, outside of them just handing it off to Saquon Barkley or finding those one-on-one matchups and spamming it with their wide receivers, it seems like it's a struggle. It's a slog for this offense. And I'm not trying to knock Kellen Moore. This is a guy getting head coach consideration, and he's done really well at his previous stops. But it's just one of those things that this does not look like the offense we saw a couple of years ago when Shane Steichen was running it with that West Coast approach. Felt like Hurts was letting it rip a lot more, had answers for when he got out of the pocket. And that just doesn't seem to be the case this year. And as much as people are calling for the Eagles defense putting clamps on this Chiefs offense, I would be very wary of saying that the Chiefs defense, knowing how good they are at containing the run, can shut down this Eagles offense and force Hurts to make plays that he hasn't been able to make all year.
Let's save this kind of discussion for Thursday. I think we might be
Thursday.
jumping ahead a little
jumping
bit.
ahead, yeah.
But to that point, in terms of defenses shutting teams down, getting to our next game, you have this game in particular a bit higher than I do. Looking back on this one, it was more exciting than I initially thought. I thought this game was super boring at the time. That would be New England beating Seattle, and talking about suffocating defenses. This was the Legion of Boom in their prime. They had just come off of a Super Bowl win where they destroyed the Broncos with an MVP, Peyton Manning. That was the 55 touchdown year, thinking back on it now. And then they come into this game, they have a chance to win it on the goal line, and then Malcolm Butler happened. We all know what happened. Marshawn Lynch wasn't handed the ball. There's an interception. The game's over. There's pandemonium on the field. Fights are occurring. But Tom Brady walks away with another one after this one.
This was, I think, very career defining for not only the Seattle Seahawks, but the New England Patriots. And we'll start with the Seahawks first. If they had won, they handed the Lynch, they score the touchdown. Tom Brady isn't able to drive down and score a field goal to send it to overtime. Like, he loses 3 Super Bowls, 07, 2011, and 2014. And he would not have won a Super Bowl and since 2004. So that's a huge gap between Brady wins. It was already a decade at that point. And so when you look at that, the Seahawks would have become the second team to repeat since the 03-04 Patriots. Obviously, they aren't able to do it. The next team that is able to do it is Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid. Just now, they're now heading up to a potential three-peat. But going back to that, it completely broke the Seahawks. They lost so many games the following year, including to the Carolina Panthers in Seattle. Greg Olsen for the game-winning score. Oh my gosh, I'm getting excited just thinking about it. But it broke their spirit. It was the Bane and Batman encounter where it was I broke your body, but I was wondering what would break first, your spirit or your body. And Jordan Mailata actually said that against the Washington Commanders this past week. Very hilarious comment. I love to see that. I keep getting side railed. And the big takeaway is Tom Brady, he's down 10 points. It was the first time a quarterback or a team has been down 10 points in the Super Bowl in the fourth quarter. He makes a comeback against the Legion of Boom. He's able to drive down, find his checkdowns. They're able to march down, score. They go up 28-24. Javon Curse has that circus catch, very similar to David Tyree, very similar to Mario Manningham. And you think it's happening again. Like, Tom Brady isn't able to win it again. And so after they win that, they win 2 more Super Bowls after that. They go to 4 Super Bowls in a 5-year span that hadn't been broken until the Chiefs just now with 5 Super Bowls in 6-year span. So it's just very cool to see that a lot of history got made because of that game. And I don't think if the Patriots, I would say lose that game, Marshawn Lynch runs it in. I don't know if they necessarily win in 2016. I don't know if this team has necessarily continuity to win again in 2018. So I think this is very pivotal for the Patriots dynasty as we know it, for that second iteration where they won another 3 rings.
Yeah, it was a big inflection point, I think, for the entire league, right? Maybe if they lose this one, we see them back in 2015. The Panthers see them in the Super Bowl, which I think we would have won, by the way. Maybe if the Seahawks win, they continue to keep going, right? Maybe they beat us in the playoffs when we play them. They had a chance to. They came back in the second half in that game. We ultimately put them away. But like you said, downward spiral for the Seahawks since then. They haven't really done much noise in the playoffs. They had to get rid of Russell Wilson. I don't think that was the beginning of the downfall for Russ, but it certainly wasn't a great look to throw the ball 2 yards out and come away or have it end up in an interception. And I personally loved to see the Seahawks get beat because I think we had like a little mini rivalry with them at the time. They would always beat us, but seeing them lose, us finally beating them twice the next season, that was awesome. But to me, this one doesn't even come close to the number 1 Super Bowl in the past decade. And I had to do some convincing to get you to put this one number 1 on your list, but it's the greatest comeback in NFL history, maybe in sports championship history. You could argue it with the 3-1 comeback with LeBron James in 2016, but down 28-3 in the third quarter, 2 minutes left in the third quarter, you're down 25. Talk about those 10-point comebacks. This is 25. He takes it to overtime. They win it in overtime. This was the greatest moment in Super Bowl history, in my opinion. To me, this is what made Tom Brady the greatest of all time. Mahomes can, obviously Brady has 7 rings. Mahomes can catch up to that, but until he has like something like this. And to our point, he's had multiple 10-point comebacks in the Super Bowl, but none of them felt quite as real as that 28-3 comeback. And the Falcons were no slouches that year. Their offense was incredible. I think they averaged like 35 points per game. It was insane. Julio Jones has maybe the best catch ever that we see in the Super Bowl down this along the close sideline where the camera was. But all of that didn't matter because Tom Brady and his devil magic were able to pull off the massive comeback and get the win in overtime. First overtime Super Bowl that we've seen.
First, obviously we've seen another, saw the second one last year. But to your point, I think what makes this game really special is the fact that you're able to come back from not only such a large margin, but the defense is able to make stops. Because if the defense simply allows a field goal at any point in the fourth quarter, which that Julio Jones catch almost put the Falcons in the position to do so, to put the game away, you don't win. So it is very important that the defense did what they did. And on top of that, when you look at kind of what the Patriots were able to do, is that they were able to just kind of chip away at this. They were able to be methodical. They didn't score a touchdown on every drive. Obviously, they score a touchdown to make it 28-9, kick a field goal 28-12, and then it's 2 touchdowns with 2-point conversions to send it to overtime. And it was just very cool to kind of go from, oh, the Patriots are going to lose to, oh, wait, it could happen. Oh, wait, it is happening. Oh, wait, they won. And it was just the meltdown from that because it was 21-3 at half. Tom Brady did throw a pick 6. This is a Patriots defense that really only allowed 21 points in the Super Bowl, but they allowed 28. But it was just their ability to tighten up, put the clamps on, and then Tom Brady to do what he does best. And where we talked about the David Tyree catch, the Mario Manning, Javon Curse, even though the Seahawks didn't win, they had all these magical catches. Tom Brady finally got his with Julian Edelman when the ball gets tipped up. I think it was by Robert Alford, and Julian Edelman's able to grab it. And
it's about that far off the ground, like that far.
And I know not everybody's like the biggest Troy Aikman or Joe Buck fan, but hearing them call it, it was a very iconic moment. It was just one of those things where it's just like ingrained in your brain as one of those like signature Super Bowl moments. So I think it had everything. The biggest thing for me is that this wasn't a back and forth game. Like what we talked about. This went up 28-3, and then the Patriots win 34-28. So clearly it was lopsided either in the Falcons' favor or in the Patriots' favor at different points of the game. And it wasn't that back and forth. It wasn't what we saw with the Chiefs and the Eagles a couple years ago. It wasn't what I thought we got with the Seahawks Patriots, where it was back and forth and you had everything coming down to the last few minutes. You had those signature moments and you still had that meme at the end. Obviously, it's not 28-3 meme worthy, but throwing it on the 1 yard line with Marshawn Lynch right there, like that got people talking. That still has people talking. And so it's very interesting just kind of looking at some of these Super Bowls. And obviously, I think 28-3 has to be one of the best Super Bowls of all time, if not the best.
Yeah, I think 28-3 as a meme tops everything. Every March 28th, you still see Falcons fans going through hell on Twitter because people will bring it up because they deserve to. And to your point that it wasn't competitive throughout the entire game, I weirdly think that made the comeback all that more impressive. Like, to your point, the Falcons were smoking them in the first half. Even NFL Films, they always film the sideline. You get good quotes and stuff from everything. I can't remember what Falcons player it was. It was right before half, but it's like, look at how we're doing them. We're about to get a ring. And then it happened. There's a famous Snapchat because you used to be able to do filters with games. And it was like easiest 500 I've ever won. And it was a Falcons fan in a bar with a bunch of Patriots fans. And obviously we saw how that turned out. The place where I was watching the game, I was the only person cheering for Tom Brady and the Patriots. Everybody hated the Patriots at the time. It's kind of like how people hate the Chiefs now, but I cheered for him because I couldn't bear to see a Falcons team win, especially right after we lost. And I'm like, everyone's like, oh, Jago, look, the Patriots are losing, but then slowly it would come back. And like you talked about, the field goal, the touchdown, and I was going crazy each time. And finally, James White gets the octopus to send it to overtime, and then he scores in overtime. He really should have gotten Super Bowl MVP. I know you have to really give it to the QB, but James White really needs to be remembered more in the history of the greatest Super Bowl of the last 10 years, maybe ever. And I can't keep talking about it. 28-3 will live in infamy when we get to Super Bowl 100 or 150. If the NFL is still going, that will still be a meme. It'll still be hopefully the biggest comeback ever. If the Falcons get back in, hopefully they blow an even bigger lead. But 28-3 still rings to this day.
What's interesting is because, like you said, you were around a bunch of people that hated on Tom Brady, and I love how people are like trying to defend the Patriots dynasty. Oh, you guys weren't that bad. The Chiefs dynasty is so much worse. No, that's recency bias. You just hate the team that's winning. Like they cheated.
The Patriots
they
for like
got
20 years.
Cheating.
Yeah, the Patriots were cheating for 20 years.
And they got away with it. And it's so like it is what it is. Obviously, it was still greatness. I mean, Brady and Belichick, some of the best to ever do it. But when you look at that game in particular, I think like the cool aspect of that is that like the Falcons like couldn't keep it together. And as a Panthers fan, that's as like the cherry on top you could ask for. But it was, I went over to somebody's house during halftime because I thought the game was over. And so I was hearing lines come up of like, oh, wow, if you had bet on the Falcons by 20 plus points, how much money you would have won. And like you're talking about all those odds and you're like, you don't think at that point that the Patriots are coming back. And sure enough, they mounted their rally, but it was cool checking those odds. So speaking of that, and a segue from our top 10 Super Bowls over the past decade into Purrfect Takes, I think for Super Bowl Sunday, like I talked about during the Eagles Super Bowls, there's going to be a 40 plus yard touchdown by AJ Brown. I just think you're going to take that go shot around midfield and it's going to connect. So you can mark it down. We saw it the last two times the Eagles were in the Super Bowl. Obviously, I'm worried about kind of the guy that's going to be covering them. They don't have L'Jarius Sneed like they did last time. And I would personally probably want Trent McDuffie on Devontae Smith and just double and bracket AJ Brown. But there's probably going to be an opportunity to take a one-on-one matchup. And I think the Eagles get that opportunity on Sunday.
Yeah. And before the 39-yard touchdown from AJ Brown, just narrowly making your take miss this past week. But no, we saw it happen with Matt Collins, right? Obviously, you can argue that there was a false start from Deion Dawkins on that play, but the DB actually ended up pass interfering with Hollins, and they still get the deep touchdown. I don't know if that was quite 40 yards, but a big body receiver who can get down the field, the opportunity to do that to the Chiefs is there. So I kind of like this take. And the more I think about it, I think we will see something like that happen. Don't know if it'll be AJ Brown, but I think we will get a long one there. He's
going to get a 39-yard. It's going to be 39 yards. It's going to be 1 yard short, but what can you do?
Mm-hmm. Or it'll be like a 70-yard one and then get tripped up at the one and they'll push it in. That's just how it is. Again, as a Saquon guy, that's what happened to me all year. My take, I'm going back to the top of the episode when we talked about trades, right, with Luka Doncic and then Myles Garrett requesting a trade. Cooper Kupp is allegedly getting traded. And then throughout the offseason, you hear other things. I think the Panthers are going to be a big player on one of these big names we're hearing about. I don't think we're going to get Myles Garrett, but a bigger named receiver like a Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, Garrett Wilson, somebody that's established in the league, I think the Panthers will go out and trade for because I can't see them using that number 8 overall pick on an offensive player, at least at this junction, because just how bad the defense is. If they want to trade number 8 for Myles Garrett, be my guest. I'll get the little card, drive up to Cleveland and hand Andrew Berry. I'll hand it to him on a velvet pillow and be like, here's the trade you agreed to. Here's the number 8 on this card. I'll do that, but I just don't see it happening with Garrett. I do think we will be involved in one of the receiver deals. I think a 4th for DK is something we might see happen around the league. A late round pick for Cooper Kupp. I think they'll Dan Morgan and Brent Tillis and company will try to make that work.
If a 4th is all it takes to get DK Metcalf, I'm going to tell you right now, you pull the trigger. I think it's going to take at least the 2nd or 3rd. I think he's that capable of a wide receiver. And when you talk about a need for an X wide receiver, I honestly think he's a better fit than Garrett Wilson. And you want to talk about a mentor for a young wide receiver in Xavier Legette that you want to develop into that X wide receiver. I think it would be perfect to bring DK Metcalf on board. So I think that's something to kind of keep an eye on. I like him as a kind of offense contributor better than Garrett Wilson. If you can trade for Myles Garrett, go and do it because he is going to be a difference maker on defense. He is going to take this bottom of the league ranked defense to maybe an average defense. And you can surround players with him, seeing him and Clowney come off the edge. You have Derek Brown in the middle. Like, that's a ferocious defensive line and a major shift from what we saw last year. So I don't think it's realistic. We talked about that at the top of the episode, but I do like that take. And I do think if you want to see the Panthers take that step from kind of being this below average team in the NFL to being above average to playing for the NFC South title, that's a move you're going to have to make.
For sure. And DK Metcalf, to your point, who was on his coaching staff for when he got drafted? One, Dave Canales and Brad Idzik
and Dan Morgan.
Dan Morgan and probably like 3 or 4 other assistant coaches. That's going to do it for us today. You can follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Twitter, wherever you get your pods. Thursday, it's finally here. We'll actually be able to talk about the final game of the NFL season. We'll break down the Super Bowl, who we think will win this matchup, and should be a good time. If I'm right, I think we're both leaning in different directions about the winner, but stay tuned to hear our full brought out opinions on that. But until then, keep pounding. Get your stay glued to your phone, because the NBA trade deadline is up on Thursday, and if Luka can get traded, anybody can. So keep your nose to the grind there, and we'll catch you on Thursday.